I'm going to start to speak, so if you could just kind of do your thing. I have learned I need to ask permission from the real boss.
Do you want to turn the lights a little?
Dennis, do you want the lights a little?
No, this is good.
Is everybody able to see the screen? We'll leave them the way they are then. Okay. Now, we are going to start, so tell me what I asked you to do before.
Whisper.
Whisper if you need to order. If not, close the mouth, right? Lorenzo? Close the mouth. Ah, there we go. When I moved into Galloway Township, something in Galloway, we bought our house on Jimmy Leach Road. And then the denomination where I was ordained bought us a 5-acre piece of ground on Great Creek Road. I could walk through the woods from one to the other. My sons and I were out there walking. They were in high school. And I was just fascinated with this Great Creek Road. There didn't seem to be any reason why our road would start at the Wildlife Reserve, which wasn't all that old, and go straight all the way down and come across at a crazy angle on Jimmy Leach Road. I put it out of my head. Didn't think much about it until I looked at a couple maps at the Historical Society. And then there was a picture that I saw that was terribly faded. I photoshopped it, brought it up some. You'll see it. And I was introduced to the Brigantine Railroad. Now, I grew up in Atlantic City, and I must tell you that I did not know that phrase. I didn't, Joe, you might have known it. I did not know it was there. I was busy as a teenager doing other things, and then moved away at 18 years old to get away from Mr. Cantel, okay? Anyway, I started looking about it. And so I came out, as I started to find more, I realized that what it was simply a Pomona straight down Great Creek Road, out through the Wildlife Reserve, over the marshes to Brigantine, but having had a boat, I couldn't find anything there. So I let it go, and then I decided to look into it. In the process, my friend Dennis Neisler told me one day in a conversation that he grew up right on it. I mean, that's an exaggeration, obviously, on it, but you know what I mean. So one day we met out there, and it must have been reasonably cool weather, because we walked through the woods and neither of us had chiggers. So he showed me where it was. And what a difference from somebody taking you on a guided tour that had already looked at these things. Most of you may have heard the name, but you have no idea what existed. So let me start with some background. The islands in Atlantic City, Ventnor, Margate, Longport, Brigantine did not look like they look today. This particular photograph comes from a glass plate negative that dates to the 1860s. And it is in the Chelsea area of Atlantic City, but Brigantine looked primarily the same. The sand dunes that you're looking at in this picture are 30 to 50 feet high. Up in this corner up here, I can never find him, but there is a person. Here it is right here. Do you see this little thing right here? This little white thing? That's a person sitting on top of the dune. That tells you how big those dunes are. Now, down at Chelsea Avenue near the bay, they grazed cattle. What I'm saying is the islands were different. They were just open fields. But then the idea came with Atlantic City, they could be resort areas. And all of a sudden, people thought, well, we can make money from there. And so what I'm going to show you now is an early map from the 1800s of Brigantine Island. Now remember, this map wasn't drawn to be a map to you to find treasure. This was just an idea of what the Brigantine Brigantine Island would look like if it was covered from houses from Brigantine Inlet all the way to Atlantic City Inlet. They were going to build a bridge across here or a ferry, and they were going to run a railroad to here. Now, this is dream number one. It was called the North Atlantic City Railroad Company. It occurs in 1880, and within a year or two, it is dead. Because the deal was, not the railroad, that wasn't the problem. The problem was a bridge in 1880 across Absecon Inlet. Dennis?
And there was also internal problems with the Camden Atlantic Railroad, and they were supposed to back it, and
They just
they were all
backed
over the
away.
place.
And it seems that what they were all afraid of, besides being money-wise, everybody seems to be afraid of trying to build this bridge across Absecon Inlet. So evidently, Absecon Inlet at that time, with the construction at that time, it would have been too expensive to build that bridge. So, what happens is, it was going to come from Atlantic City, going up to the inlet via the Camden Railroad. A new bridge was going to be built. 3 miles of track were going to be built at Brigantine, and $2,000 per mile plus the bridge was the cost. And we know this from the Trenton State Gazette, November 9th, 1880. Those of you that go online for newspapers.com or Genealogy Bank, you can look up these same newspapers. This is not magic. It gives you the name. Now, incidentally, there is a connection between the group that's selling land and trying to develop and the railroads. About half their boards of directors are the same, but the land companies are the ones making the decisions on the railroads. And it says that, you see it mentioned in an article in the newspaper. So-and-so Brigantine Land Development Company approved the idea. Well, what do you mean you approved the idea? What do you have to do with the railroad? Well, in this particular time, there weren't a lot of laws, and New Jersey, as you all know, had the best politicians money could buy. And so there were things going on. And now, as we go further, we find out that the stockholders, what Dennis just talking about at the North Atlantic, we're going to have this meeting, and there's a war amongst the stockholders. I mean, they're actually, the press quotes them, they're getting rough with each other at the meeting in Camden. And finally, the railroad dies, the company got their $7,000 bond back from the state, and dream number one is dead. So now we go to dream number two. Now here's one that you might not know about this island. You know, you can walk the beach all the way up to the north end of Brigantine, and then you will come to a little inlet called Brigantine Inlet, or more popularly known as Wreck Inlet, because when you try to go out it, the shoals are terrible. And this is Little Beach. In the 1880s, they were going to develop all of Little Beach. But then you have the question, you say, how do you get there? And you can see the railroad station. Here it is here. Where was that going to go? This is dream number two. Well, dream number two is a little different. Dream number two, and this map is not the scale. This is supposed to be Camden. Here is the Camden Atlantic, or not the Camden Atlantic, what was it called? Is it Camden Atlantic?
Camden Atlantic Railroad until 1896, and it becomes the West Jersey and Seashore.
Okay.
Under the control of Pennsylvania.
At this particular piece, this is Absecon here. It's about to go over the marsh into Atlantic City. You can see that. But Brigantine's idea number two, this is now going to have a branch coming off, and it's going to go to Leeds Point, you know where the Oyster Creek is. It's going to go out to the Oyster Creek Inn. And from there, initially, they're going to ferry people to Long Beach Island, to Little Beach, and they're going to do the Atlantic City thing again. They're going to try it to go across here again with a bridge or a ferry over the inlet. These were all proposed. We have no way of knowing, unless, Dennis, you've seen anything in the archives that I haven't, how far these plans ever got. But the problem is, it dies as well. What didn't die is the idea of Brigantine being wall-to-wall houses and Island Beach, which is the Brigantine Wildlife Preserve today, or part of it, being wall-to-wall houses. You see, Atlantic City was building rapidly. And when there's rapid real estate growth, rapid housing growth, there's green stuff to be made. And so people are wheeling and dealing. And when you look at the records that do exist, you can see companies selling land to themselves almost, or a wholly owned subsidiary, and then selling it back to the parent. And I'm not a CPA, of course, and so I can't explain that to you, but there must be some way you can make money doing these swaps. Rosemary, you're a lawyer, you've done that. Frank, you are as well, and you know, I'm oblivious to it, but I guess it can be done. So, there's no record, by the way, of why this failed, but yet, all of a sudden, everything, including the yacht that this particular venture owns, is sold. Now, third, now we have a railroad that is proposed, a new shore railroad by the Pennsylvania Railroad Company, and I'm sorry that these aren't better, but this is the best scan that's available. And basically what's going to happen is they're going to run the tracks from Absecon straight up Shore Road, and they are going to eventually build a bridge over what we call Chestnut Neck or something there, and they're going to try to hook Barnegat, Long Beach, and everything, and finally connect to New York railroads. This thing dies. By the way, the date of the article, we're still in the 1880s. It dies. But the dream doesn't die. You get that idea? Number 1 fails, number 2 fails, number 3 fails. Number 4, however, would not fail. I guess I shouldn't have bumped that. Anyway, New York Tribune, May 24, 1887. The Atlantic City and Brigantine Beach Railroad was incorporated a few days ago, and it gives us the name of the board of directors. And this begins the railroad that will actually be built, that when it's cut through the woods in Galloway, after it failed, they paved the roadbed and call it Great Creek Road. And so, what do we have? Well, we have actually 2 plans here on this railroad. Number 1, Absecon to Atlantic City and over the inlet. Build that bridge again. That idea keeps coming back and back and back, but it fails.
But it's the best way to get up there, because the Camden Atlantic Railroad goes to the inlet.
That's right.
And they're right there. Inlet pier is there. All that is, it's the perfect place.
It is, but for some reason, the Pennsylvania Railroad and what we call the Reading eventually today, the big companies didn't believe they could economically build a bridge across the inlet, and they all complained about the same thing, that the current coming through, especially during storms, is too much to deal with for a regular bridge. Now, is it or is it not? Well, I can tell you there's a lot of water coming through there from having a boat as a teenager. Now, Rob Reed, who's the city planner, got me this map. And this map really is, Rob, the one that gave me the courage to really start to put this together. Because I could now look at it. Now, this file is a TIFF file, for those of you that are computer literate. But it is so long and so small that Photoshop will not open it. It is beyond the parameters of Photoshop. So, but interesting, the cheap one, the cheap file thing in Windows opens it, okay? Here's what it is. And I can show you this at another level, if you wish, later. And you'll see more of it. This is Brigantine over here. The map was made in 2 pieces because evidently the map drawer couldn't get the paper any longer. So we had to say, okay, this ends here and this ends here, just stick it together, you know what's in the middle. But here's what it does. It runs out of Brigantine, and it has 3 drawbridges before it gets to what we call the Brigantine Wildlife Preserve today. How many of you have ever been in the Brigantine Wildlife Preserve? Raise your hand. When you go in there and you go on the road, you go straight out, and you go out for a quarter mile, third of a mile, and you have to make a hard left. Well, before you make that left, what you are driving on is the roadbed of the Brigantine Railroad. That was the roadbed that was built. So it comes out, and I'll start over, well, we'll start here, and it goes all the way across the bays, 3 bridges, and they are drawbridges. This is the plan that went to the state for approval. They're drawbridges, and we'll come back to that later. They go into the Brigantine Wildlife Preserve. They make a bit of a, if I'm on the train and I'm out of Brigantine, I've come across the meadows like this. I've now hit the Brigantine Wildlife Preserve. They're going to make a slow curve to the right, and then a slow curve back to the left. And then they are on that dead straightaway we call Great Creek Road today. Goes all the way to where Great Creek Road. Now remember, we're pre-Parkway. We're 1890. Straight across Jim Lee's Road on a wild angle. It's a really tight angle. And becomes on the other side of the Parkway what we now call today Buchanan Avenue. My kids live on almost the corner of Buchanan Avenue. It goes all the way through the woods, and Dennis, you need to help me here because this is confused in my mind. Yeah. And it then makes a bend, a left bend, and crosses across what we call the White Horse Pike today, someplace just east of the diner, I assume?
A little bit west. And then it does, and then it makes a slow curve where it then connects to the Pomona, to the train track today in Pomona.
So it would go through that little strip shopping center there, maybe?
It actually goes, if you guys remember, there used to be a bank on the corner. There used to be a bank right there where the asphalt is, on the same block where the Cumberland Farms used to be.
Yeah.
There used to be a little tiny bank there, like a guarantee bank.
Yeah.
It was in a modular home.
Okay.
Right through that area, about there, where the retention basin is at the diner.
Yeah.
And then comes through, and then on a very steep angle, and then curves inward to match the railroad tracks in which you see today in
And here is the curve going across, and then here is the curve coming back. And the station, the functional station,
is literally in the woods today.
Out
in the
near
woods
the-
today.
near
It's
the-
in the woods today.
near where the Hindu temple is, kind of?
No, the Pomona station would have been very much adjacent to Assumption Church's old schoolyard.
Okay.
And I found remember I told you there used to be there was an iron post sticking out of the ground there? And that's not for a sign or a crossing sign. That was probably for some kind of either water or fuel for the station. That station was there.
Okay.
And that's why if you look at the old maps, you can see Atlantic Avenue coming out and then meandering. And you could even see it in pictures of the aerial view of Assumption Church from like 66 or 63. And you can see the road meandering. And then there's also a roadway that comes in from the White Horse Pike, which is a straightaway, which is where at that yard, all of the material for the building of the Garden State Parkway in 1953 came in there. And the Pennsylvania Railroad owned all that property.
Okay.
And
Now,
kept it, by the way.
I'm going to move very quickly through these bullet points. And when it's all over, if you have questions, you can ask me. I want to move through it for the sake of time and for the sake of you not being bored. Bullet point lists anesthetize people. So focus a little bit because it's as tough for me as it is for you. First, April 2nd, 1887, the Pennsylvania Railroad authorizes it. $7,000 per mile plus bridges, and you can see where I got the information. We come later in that year, a month later, and they add a bunch of local and state politicians to the board to get everybody on board because they want quick approvals. Another month later, the Brigantine Improvement Company. This is the land company now in Brigantine. This is the one that's pulling all the strings from the background, as far as I can tell, aka Brigantine Land Company. The stockholders there approved the finances for the railroad. Well, that tells you who's really in charge. At that point, construction contracts are signed, and by '89, they have 9 miles of the railroad completed, There are 2 hotels approved for the Terminus and Brigantine, plus remodeling Holton's Hotel that's already there. So these are going to be nice hotels that are there. They're going high class. Second of all, they go to put the trestle over Grassy Bay. Every time they seem to do it, it gets knocked out by ice storms or nor'easters. I'm 75. When I was a kid, every winter from the time I was 4 or 5 years old, I ice skated on Bargaintown Pond. You say, well, why is that? My mother almost missed by 5 seconds representing the U.S. in the 1940 Olympics at speed skating. My dad was a semi-professional ice hockey player. We were on ice, but we don't on ice anymore. But these ice storms, when I was a kid even, in the late 50s and 60s, would tear up, Joe, the docks, the old docks in the bay. They'd lift them right up on their pilings. And so this is what happens. They have to go in and rebuild. Now, when we get to 1890, we're about to open, or we are, or just before we open, the Brigantine Railroad and the Camden and Atlantic Railroad canceled. The Brigantine Railroad did, and the Camden and Atlantic didn't want to put any more money in, from what I can gather.
They got all the money out of bringing all the stone and the wood and the rail down.
And then they walked away.
They made a fortune.
That's right. And then now the Pennsylvania's going to come in. Anyway, not Pennsylvania. Reading, yes. And now we have a war out there. The bridges are there threatening to burn them down because they're only 25 feet wide. The fishermen want 35 feet wide. The newspapers do not document any fires, but evidently the politicians and the railroads took their threats very seriously because they enlarged all the bridges. They finally, in 1890, finished the trestle for the Jersey City News, and the Reading Railroad that takes over now applies for a permit for their tracks, the Brigantine Railroad, to cross over the other railroad. And the other railroad says, no thank you. And they have to go to court. The court forces them to be able to put the diamond in, and Dennis had me out there and showed me where that was. And the construction is now completed, awaiting the court decision. The court decision comes in, and about the end of August, the early part of September is when it opens. The newspapers are contradictory on this area. They open it to give politicians a ride and the time at the hotel. By the way, there's one article that says the politicians actually were embarrassed at the opulence of the parties giving for them. So that tells you there was a payback here, okay? Yeah. Now you say, Norman, you're cynical. Here is an old stock certificate from the Brigantine company, and this is a Brigantine construction company that's doing the building in Brigantine. Here is a little ad where as soon as it was finished, there were roller skating and everything else at Lily Lake. Lily Lake was a park. And so here is what you could do. You could come over there. There was a ball game, Germania versus the Vineland White Sox, dancing and roller skating, swimming and boating races. Make reservations for your chicken dinner. Don't miss this grand celebration. It's the 4th of July. And by the way, auto can come. There'll be auto buses at the Absecon and Trolley that will take you there if you come the other way. So they're going to try to make a big deal out of this. They're going to try to make a Lake Olympic out of it. And at that point, what happens? They go public. $350,000 worth of stock was sold. That's a lot of money, by the way. That is a lot of money in the 1890s. A worker, by the way, for whatever reason, is shot at Pomona. Nobody seems to know why. The railroad crossing suit is adjudicated by a carefully chosen panel. Now I put that there, that's all I can say.
And that's the Pennsylvania Railroad.
That's exactly right. Pennsylvania Railroad was huge. They're a monster-sized company. And they basically just poured in, evidently, whatever they needed to pour in.
They dictated all of the terms.
Huh?
They dictated all of the terms to the Reading and the Brigantine Railroad.
Okay.
Including putting up the tower and who was going to pay for them and who was going to control them. They dictated everything.
Hotels are finished, Paul's Wine and Dine. If you had won the Atlantic City Mayoralty back then in 1890, Palillo, you would have been wined and dined. And now, I put this in even though it's politically not correct. I know it. There's a strike because the railroad isn't paying the workers building it. And who was building the railroad? Well, it really makes sense who's building it. Lorenzo. It's 1890. The Italians are starting to pour from southern Italy in. They need jobs. They're willing to do anything. And the blacks are moving up. Civil War, you said, is over. Emancipation Proclamation. Yeah, but the Jim Crow laws went right in the South, and they didn't have it any better in the South after the war than they had before the war hardly. And so they poured into the northern area to look for jobs where they could get a job. And so evidently, the Italians and African Americans didn't always like each other, but they joined together out there and they striked and they destroyed some track. And they say that one paper from Dayton, Ohio said they destroyed miles of track. I don't know whether that's true or not. And Brigantine Railroad, of course, denies that there was any money shortage. We have plenty of money. We have all the money we need. Those guys are all lying. But meanwhile, these articles hit virtually every major paper all the way to California. The projected opening is August the 28th, and by September the 17th, the Brigantine Railroad is in receivership. Where did all that money go? Okay, in October, nor'easter damages across the trestle, across Grassy Bay. Now, by the way, you say, why all this damage in nor'easters? Grassy Bay is shallow. And that means when you are if you've ever been out in a storm in the bay, the shallower the water, the easier it is to kick it up. And so what it does is it forms beach-like waves that just slam against the trestle, and they're down. I'm sure they weren't going down 100 feet with pilings. So this trestle probably had some flexibility. Once it starts moving, it's just destroyed. Well, in November, they start selling land, by the way. If you wanted to buy a lot for a house in Pomona or Cologne, you could buy it for $1 down and $1 a week for a 40 by 170 lot. And you weren't paying a whole lot for it and couldn't build your house. And so that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to build this into a Pomona Cologne utopia around there where it's going to be, remember, that had already been built up. There's already the German settlement coming in Egg Harbor that's spreading toward Pomona. They didn't call Cologne Cologne because they just were talking about perfume. Cologne is a city in what country?
Germany.
Egg Harbor City is a German settlement all the way through there. Now, did I go to? Yeah. Here are the stops of the Brigantine Railroad. You start at Brigantine Junction. Dennis told you where that was, connecting to the tracks there. There is a stop in Pomona. I suspect that stop, Dennis, is where the diamond was, the crossing was.
It's not far across from the White Horse, across towards the White Horse Lake.
Okay, so it's right in there.
In the middle of the woods today.
Okay. The next is Absecon Road. I had to call the Galloway Historical Society, Rob and Sarah Snow, and what they did is they explained to me that Highland Boulevard at one time went all the way out through Galloway and became Wrangleboro Road of today. And that went all the way out that way. And it was called the Absecon Road. But when they built all those developments, it wasn't necessary, so they shut it down. Now, I have not seen a map to say that, but I'm sure, but I've seen maps that the road is there and it looks like that's what it is. Next stop is the Port Republic stop. That's where Great Creek Road crosses Pitney Road. Now, you know where the Lutheran church is today? On the corner of that road. Right across the street from that would be where the station would be. And then you get down to Shore Road and you have the Oceanville station. Right, you know where the, what do they call it? They actually call it the
Oceanville Station.
Oceanville Station. Yeah, where,
Plaza, right, or something like that.
yeah, where Tony's Beef is. Now, Tony's Beef, by the way, best milkshakes around at Tony's Beef. And then it goes all the way across, and here's what it leaves. Let's see, leaves there a little bit after 7:30. And oh, wait a minute, this is a whole different thing. Excuse me. It goes into Brigantine, and then you have to get the ferry at the inlet to get into Atlantic City, because this is in Atlantic City. But anyway, they are the stops. The last stop is at Shore Road, and that's the end of that. Now, here is the Brigantine Junction Station, the one that was out where Dennis described to us. Here is the track coming around here. It's crossing over the one railroad, the one that exists today. This is the White Horse Pike. It comes down here. This is where Dennis had me walking.
No. On the other side, north of it, on the other side. Here, a little higher up. No, the other way. Over by the words. Right straight there. Come on, you hit every one of them except for
Here? Okay, I'm going to
Go over the tracks, one on the other side, right in that area. That's right.
Here? Okay,
Yes.
that's where we were. He's got me straightened out, okay? Now, the track came over here and connected with the other railroad. This is Port Republic Road. We call it Wrangleboro Road today, or Port Republic Road. Pomona Road. Okay, so that's kind of what it is. Now we'll pick up speed a little bit. Here, by the way, is an old picture. I have photoshopped this until I couldn't Photoshop it anymore. This is the actual diamond in the track. Now here, the diamond isn't here, the diamond is here. Okay, and Dennis, it looks to me like it's sitting right in here, now if I blow this up any further, it becomes incomprehensible.
Once traffic was gone, the Pennsylvania Railroad sent a notice. They didn't answer the notice. They had the diamond taken right out. They took the diamond out. The Pennsylvania did. Yeah, the West Jersey and Seashore. They took the diamond
And so the rest Jersey couldn't get down their line.
No, they took the diamond out and put in new straight double tracks.
Oh, wow.
They took it right out.
Okay, there is an old tower that was watching over the crossing. And going further, now this is a LiDAR map. You raise your hand if you know what LiDAR is. Okay, some of you do. You know all these countries like the Aztec Empire, the Inca Empire, where they're using this LiDAR to look down from a plane or a satellite, and they see the ground, but vegetation's invisible. So you actually see what's under the vegetation in the jungle, and you see the Mayan temple or whatever it is. Well, there are LiDAR maps available for all of New Jersey. Now, some of them, by the way, the green is a false coloring. That has nothing to do with anything. But here you can see the railroad coming up from Pomona, crossing over the present railroad, crossing over Route 30.
You know that mound, there's actually a mound of earth in that exact location. You can see it today.
Is that right?
Straight, yeah, you can see the base of the railroad from White Horse Pike, especially in this time of the year. You can see that mound.
Well, here it comes up here, and there's a slight curve here, because this becomes Buchanan Avenue in that development of homes, which are right across from the entrance of Stockton. Now, why do I know it? My son and daughter-in-law live in there, and they live a house off Buchanan Avenue. And here is Buchanan Avenue coming from Pomona. Here it comes up here, and here's my son and daughter-in-law's house at Poplar Avenue. It comes up here, and originally the rail bed went right through to where the parkway is. But in the early 1950s, they didn't need that. It wasn't of any use anymore. It crosses. Now look at this line. From the first arrow here, here's the rail bed, and look at Gray Creek Road. It's dead straight. Here it is right here. And by the way, here is where that Absecon station would have been. It continues. Now I want you to see something here before we go any further. This is a little thing called Maddox Creek. Starts about Ridgewood and 2nd Avenue. That's as close as you need to know. It is a trickle. It goes under Jimmy Leach Road It is that wide and about that deep and goes through a culvert. Even when we have snowstorms and bad nor'easters, it doesn't back up. But it keeps on going through and goes under Great Creek Road. And whenever we get a terrible rainstorm, it floods out a little bit of Great Creek Road. How many of you have ever gone out to Pitney Road after a snowstorm or a bad rainstorm, going toward Port Republic, going toward Moss Mill Road, and the road was just flooded? That is Maddox Creek. Maddox Creek picks up all this stuff from back in here by the old high school and everything, and here is going to be one of the Achilles heels of the Brigantine Railroad. It's going to flood out. It goes down like that. And there's a couple of articles that say train couldn't get to Pomona. It tried to go through and stalled out in the middle of the water. Well, they had it trestled evidently, but that wasn't enough. So anyway, to take you now, it keeps on going down Great Creek Road, crosses Shore Road, here's the station there, here's Tony's Beef today, and keeps on going out. Here's the turns I told you about. Goes out through the Brigantine Wildlife Preserve and straight across trestles, and the trestles are not that high. We're going to see that. So, here's the Oceanville train station. That's the one on Route 9, and that sits, well, you can't see it, okay? It's here. You see this line going across the street? That is Shore Road, and that is the railroad tracks right there. Now, by the way, a couple people lost their life on there. Weren't paying attention. The only train sign they have is this little thing here. There's no lights. It's your own risk. And a couple people were killed at this particular thing. And what you see over here is what? Can you see this in the shadow? It's a horse and buggy. It's not a car. It's a horse and buggy. We go further real quickly. Picture yourself on looking across Lily Lake, and here is the siding. There's a second siding. The railroad tracks is up higher. The siding is down below. And here are two boxcars from the P&R. What did P&R stand for?
Philadelphia and Reading.
Huh?
Philadelphia and Reading.
Philadelphia and Reading. So now that picture is what triggered me to do the research. I have had that at two Photoshop experts, and that's about the best we've been able to get out of it. This is the type of locomotive, not the actual locomotive, but the type of locomotive that pulled it, 2 wheels and 2 wheels on each side in the center. And it's not a big locomotive, but in all probability, you only had 2 or 3 cars. You're not, and again, I can't tell you that for sure because there's no records that I've seen. Okay. Here is what the trestles look like. In the 1920s, before they had taken all the rails out over the marshes, this is over a little creek, and this, we're told, is Clarence Conover standing there. You can see the rails are still left, but the pilings are gone from below it. Here is what the rail looked like, and you can see it's broken in here. This is what it looked like going across Grassy Bay. And here are the type of bridges they use. These are called A-frame bridges. Now, here's something I just learned. The A-frame bridge was the pet bridge for small lines of the Pennsylvania Railroad, Dennis. I didn't know that. And so what this bridge does is you can't see it here. Some way, it's a drawbridge. It cranks up manually the bridge and lifts it down probably someplace over here or maybe over here. There is some sort of house for the bridge tender to be at. But remember, he didn't have to be out there all the time because they knew when the trains ran. And that's when they probably opened them. Here we are with the Brigantine station. And now in the middle 1890s, they installed a trolley line going from one end of Brigantine to the other, and they ran double-deck trolleys. And the newspapers say that they were packed with people all spring, summer, and fall. The railroad did not make money, the trolley line did. Now, by the way, coincidentally enough, some of the people on the board of the railroad and the land company, they are also on the board of the Brigantine Transportation Company, which is the trolley line, okay? Now, here is what it looked like going in the Brigantine. Yeah, here is the station. Yeah, you can see this is kind of a turnaround for the trolley in here. And these are the maintenance places. There are hotels here, and going down here, there's at most 4 hotels. And now let's pick up speed. Atlantic City. How do they commute with Atlantic City? The trolley line builds a pier into Absecon Inlet. And the station to the trolley line is on the pier. We finally have a sketch of the pier. It's on the pier. Over here in Atlantic City, at the inlet where Garwood Mills is, for all you old Atlantic Cityites.
An old campsite.
Yeah, here is the other pier, and they are running a ferry back and forth, and they are shuttling people to this trolley. And people, Gary, are filling it to go over and see Brigantine. Remember, there's no television. There's really no radio. You gotta find things to do if you take your family and you go to the shore for a week. Huh?
No light bulbs too.
Well, there are light bulbs. Yes, there are light bulbs, because what put the trolley out of business is when the railroad went out of business, due to broken bridge, they couldn't get the coal to the electric plant that's there for the trolley, and so the trolley becomes non-functional. Yeah. Here is a sketch of one of the hotels, thanks to Paul Schott, the Brigantine Excursion House. So what happens? The first decade wasn't so good. Somebody's killed at Oceanville, creditors start to execute judgment, they have to do a management shakeup. Again, the nor'easter takes out part of the trestle, but the trolleys start to run. They start to buy steamers, actual steamers, to get more and more people across the inlet, because the trolleys and the hotels are going crazy. The hotels add fishing, bird shooting, skiing, to bathing. And now, there's even an article in the Camden Morning Post where they are planning to connect the Oceanville station, that line right there, somehow to lines coming in from New York. Nothing is ever said of it again. I'm assuming it was a pipe dream, and it never happened. By the way, nobody seems to have been terribly interested in building a railroad bridge across the Mullica either. Yeah, for whatever reason. They don't connect it to New York. They do the New York connection, remember, all the way up by Atzion, outside of Hamilton. So that never happens in our area. Receivership again, foreclosures increase, contract favoritism, and by the way, I'm sure it was true, Nor'easter destroys some trestle again. They buy 2 more steamers. It's bought by a guy named Cook from New York, the whole thing, who, by the way, had his finger in it from the beginning. And so who knows how that happens. The Reading finally cancels the contract in the middle 1890s, and they won't give them engines or anything anymore. They have to pay for them, so they go farther into debt. And evidently at one point there was a big forest fire off of just north of Grape Creek Road today, and that actually threatened the railroad, but it never came across. And this is the last one of these things, and they're so far behind on their bills that there are now threats to attach the steamboats. The company's indebtedness has doubled. The railroad and the trolley are sold to somebody named J. Jane of Philadelphia, the Baltimore Sun tells us. But in the reorganization, Cook is still in charge. So again, we have one hand greasing the other. And there's plans to connect the Brigantine Railroad to Tuckerton and New York Street again for the Wall Street Journal in 1900. It never happens. It's a dead deal. Planned route. Tuckerton, here was even the plan. Goes from Tuckerton, we built a bridge across the Mullica River. You go to Tuckerton, then to Whiting Junction, to Lakewood, to Red Bank, and then to the Central Jersey track. It's right in the paper, but nothing happens because there's not enough business to make money with the railroad as it is. Why build another one? More damage.
Norm,
Yes.
you get a lot of this, you're quoting Paul
States.
Yes.
Did the press or the local papers get
No.
any of this information?
Very little. The local press says very, very little
They stayed out.
about anything negative in Atlantic City. Now, let me tell you something. This was still going on when I was a kid. The politicians controlled everything, and they didn't want to. Let me say, we have diaries at the County Historical Society from people that say what it was like to come to Atlantic City in the 1860s, and it was a greenhead mosquito nightmare. But according to the papers, it was wonderful.
When even as late as the 1890s and the turn of the century, after all the Camden Atlantic Railroad's fiduciary difficulties, they still would not talk about it publicly. It was just a thing you would kowtow to the radio, to the railroads. You just did.
We don't realize it today because we live in an era where free press is actually free press, almost to the point now where in some cases the press is promoting their own agenda and not doing news in some cases. But the fact of the matter is it was the reverse back here. The press was simply the organism of the vested interest to promote their interest. More damage, this washout here, Maddox Creek, right at the Port Republic, right above the Port Republic station. Storm came through, washed it out. The deep gully, which had permitted the rails to go down, the foremost car goes down, it collapses the whole rail, and they have to fix it. Now this is an old 1902 map of Brigantine, and this shows you the channel coming in. And I do not remember why I put that there, so let's just, I look at my,
Senior moment.
oh, okay, you know something, there's not enough of it there. I found a railroad pass, Atlantic City Railroad pass from the Philadelphia and Camden for my great-great-grandmother she had. And you say, why would she have a railroad pass that she could go and come as she pleased? Because she was in the Leeds family, and the railroads in Atlantic City bought their land from the Leeds family, because in 1838, my fifth great-grandfather, Jeremiah Leeds, died, who owned 90-some% of Atlantic City, and he left it to his kids, and we have that in the orphans' court records. And Abby was a granddaughter, and so she ended up with a big chunk of land, and they probably made her a deal. We'll buy the land for X, and we'll give you a free pass. You can go to Camden, whatever you want. Camden was a big city at that time. You could get the ferry over to Philadelphia. Tom Kinsella, professor at Stockton. He and I are toying with this. We are toying with the idea of how you start a new ghost story. Here's a guy named William Barney, black guy. He and his two buddies go out on the track. This is just before the railroad is destroyed in October of '03. And they're out there for a night of drinking. They go into one of the bridge tender shacks and they proceed to drink. At some point in the night, early evening, as the Northeaster is doing, Barney, who just had one Iron City beer too much. You remember, for all of you, in Bones, Iron City, 3 or 4.
Iron City Quartz, 50 cents.
Huh?
Iron City Quartz, 50 cents.
50 cents. You see all these old Atlantic City culture coming out, okay? They go out there. He decides to take a walk. Last train out of Brigantine. Curiously enough, Dennis, it's the last train to ever come out of Brigantine. Okay? The guy in a nor'easter in the marshes, he doesn't know anybody's on the track. Whacks him down, drags him, mangles his body, and finally it falls between the trestles, and they find him the next day, ground to pieces. And I don't have it in my, I wish I had it in my thing. I sent it to Tom Kinsella, and I said, Tom, could we start a ghost story here? The ghost of the Brigantine Railroad. He sent me back a quick thing that he wrote, a paragraph. And you can tell he teaches people how to write, okay? And it's this wonderful thing. The image I saw, was it a real person? Was it not? He was, and it's just incredible talent. So we may mess around, and in one of the Stockton publications, we may start a New Jersey Devil type thing, a harmless little thing called The Ghost of the Brigantine Railroad, or something there to that effect. Anyway, let's move on and wrap this up. Brigantine trestle is destroyed, receivers appointed, and by the way, look how far, bringing up your question, right here, a receiver is appointed. It's in the Pottsville Journal, but it's not in the Atlantic City paper. I mean, they weren't going to say anything bad. And people are still killed, by the way, on the railroad, okay, because they used the railroad from Brigantine Wildlife Preserve all the way to Pomona for several more years to transport oysters. Oysters were a big business then, so that stayed there for a while. And in 1910, there is an idea that they are now going to rebuild it from Absecon out, and it's going to be a great success. And it made it to an article in the paper, and in all probability, that's all it ever was an article in the paper that some reporter wrote. And then, you can see the sad face, in 1910, everything was auctioned off, sold for scrap, the thing, except not all of it was removed. Mr. Kim, tell me when you lived in Brigantine and duck hunting.
Probably the late 80s.
The late 80s. He's out there on the marshes, duck hunting, walking around, and what do you run into?
A full section of track.
Still sitting there. I went out there today, last year with a friend. It's either not there or it's just sunk down in the marshes with everything. But not that I could do anything with it because each foot of rail, Dennis, you said it today on the phone.
Every yard is, what, 80 pounds?
80, so if you pick up a yard of rail, 80 pounds.
We have
Imagine moving it, huh?
one couple on Marty. We have
Get a piece of rail.
right next to the keel.
Rail or wood?
Rail. One piece of rail.
The actual rail.
It is, yeah, it's there.
Now, he lives at Chestnut Neck, huh?
But I don't know what rail that is, but it's possible that waves could do it. I know waves that have moved pig iron.
It was,
Pig iron.
Is that right?
it was in
Moved
the
in the
marsh,
mulligan. Yeah.
next to our house, buried forever. And we showed it to this one Marconi landscapers, and he was so intrigued that he dug it up and pulled it out of the ground. It's not a big deal.
Thank you for your wonderful attention. Now, I want to say this to you as we close. First of all, thank you for staying awake. I had to hear myself give this before I start to do the writing that Stockton wants me to write. It's just, this is kind of my storyboard, if you will, a PowerPoint. And now I'll start to write, and Paul Shop will help me, and Tom will help me. And out of it, hopefully, in the spring, will come an article in the Sojourn. You were wonderful in your attention, and none of you snored. A couple of you tried a couple times, but I just want to let you know you are very, very valued friends, and I'm glad you're here. I would like you to pick up the sheet in front of you. Yeah. Here you are.
Everybody put
And at the bottom, by the way, has everybody paid?
You have it. You have it.
I haven't, okay, okay. Other than me, okay. You're okay here? You're okay at this table? You got enough money? Do you guys have enough here? You're all done, okay. I'll take care of it there. Let's go to the bottom of our sheet and repeat our recessional together as we leave. Until we meet again, let us remember our obligations to our forefathers who gave us our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, an independent Supreme Court, and a nation of free people. And pray that we continue to have that long